This is a vlog. So what I have here, I'm going to be talking about today. Before I sit back down in my chair and enjoy a cigar here, I have a CAO Brazilian cigar. We're going to be talking about tree felling, pine, firewood. We're going to be talking about potential wood stoves and solar power energy for heating your home. And I have lots of free time since I've have another possible potential case again, and I'm not going to talk about it because I don't want to hurt anything of my case or the value of it. But so what I have here behind me here, yeah, there we go, is split pine. I split that yesterday. I cut down a tree over here. I don't know if you guys can see that. That little tree right there. It was getting eaten away by ants. I have here, let me show you. I have here probably about two-thirds of a cord, or half to two-thirds of a cord of pine here. I also have more beside my house here. But here, let me pause this, and then I'll put it back on the stand. I have a decent amount of pine, but I want to switch over to the wood stove when I have a little bit more money, a little bit more opportunity to do that. Right now, I can't afford it right now, but on average, you need about 2 cords of wood. From the wood experts I've seen online, you need about 2 cords of firewood per 1,000 square feet of your home. And mine's just about a little over 1,000 square feet, 1,140 square feet to be exact. And to be on the safe side, I could probably use 5 to 6 cords of wood just to be safe, because then that would double my supply for the whole year. But this is only going to be used for like the winter, so probably I wouldn't even need that much. Probably 3 or 4 would be fine. 4 would be probably overkill, but 3.5 cords of firewood for the winter to heat my home. This is not counting other stuff. This is just heating your home. It's not boiling water. It's just heat, just for keeping the temperature in check. And for me, probably about three cords. But what I'm doing so far with the tree felling is I'm not cutting down any tree that I feel like cutting down. Like, everything that I'm cutting down is calculated. So I'm doing selective harvesting, but compared to like other tree fellers where they pick out the healthiest tree and cut it down, I cut down trees that are already dead, or they're dying, or they're like a hard lean, or they're dangerous widowmakers. I cut down trees that are basically, I would say, useless, as far as like, still living. They're like dead or rotting trees, and instead of just letting them rot to the outdoor elements, I cut them down. I use them as firewood, and try to use as much of the fuel sources as I can, and that's what I'm doing. Not using it right now, of course, but I'm using it to plan ahead for the next 1.5 to 2 years. If I decide to use a wood stove or just a regular fire or whatever, you have a fuel source, and you have to think smart like that. You have to think ahead, and that's what I'm doing. So I'm not cutting down any tree just because I feel like it. Like, I'm looking at trees that are, potential hazards, or that could fall on somebody's car, my car, neighbor's car, could fall on your head, my head, or somebody else's head, or whatever, and kill them. So every tree that I look at it's either dead, leaning, is already dead, rotted, or dry rotted. And so a majority of the wood that I cut is basically from trees that were dead, dying, rotted, or were going to eventually rot. And so that's what I cut down with this latest pine. So that's kind of what I do for right now. I kind of wish I had a bigger force so I could cut down more pines. But on average, a pine, my red pines that I have so many on my property, they grow about 10 inches a year. So that's almost a foot a year. And that's for their first 60 years. Then after that, then they stop growing, or they don't grow as much. And So like, you know, I wouldn't say that I could live off of this pine alone for all my heating for like the rest of my life. There's no way. But it's a good way to get a good heat source and save up on money. So like if I switch to a wood burning stove, um, it cuts the cost of heating by 50% or more. And if you use regular cord firewood instead of a wood pellet grill or a wood pellet stove, um, then you save even more cost because it's just regular firewood and it's on your property, so you're not paying anything for firewood. And another thing with the wood burning myth is the myth is, for everybody that heats their home with wood, the myth is this, is that you can't use pine because pine is resinous and it doesn't burn good. It creates lots of creosote in your chimney or in your fireplace and can create a fire hazard. And while that's true with many unseasoned firewoods, um, if you season pine properly, it's not a hazard. Um, in fact, I was burning pine the other night, probably a couple weeks ago, and I burned it with my nice dry cherry wood, right? And cherry dries very very quick within 4 to 6 weeks of cutting it and splitting it, and like it's with pine it can dry anywhere from 6 months to a year and a half to maybe even 2 years, depending on how dry it is. And where was I going with this? And like so, if you season your pine, it's not a fire hazard. It's not it's not gonna not burn. It's not gonna create a creosote buildup as any other wood would. And in fact, it's actually kind of funny because people say that, and it's like in Europe, what do you think a majority of these people that heat their homes in Europe and in Canada and even in many parts of the United States, North America, heck, even maybe even Mexico, where there's pines, there's evergreen forests. Like, what do you think they heat their homes with? Pine, because it's plentiful and it grows back very fast, almost a foot a year. So, pine is the main choice because it's so much of it. Now, if you use the higher BTU, a British thermal unit of firewood, like oak, you're not going to need as much of oak, so to speak, because it's a denser wood, it's a heavier wood, it's also a hardwood, um, and it has less resin, but it also takes longer to dry. It's a little bit more expensive too if you buy the firewood. But even if you bought the firewood, right, it's still cheaper than right now where I'm on propane. Yeah, the propane does everything for me. It does the heating for the home. It does the hot water tank, the boiler. It does everything. But the downside of propane, although it is good for the environment and it doesn't create any CO2 emissions, I don't believe, is it costs a lot to get your tank refilled. So it's anywhere from 500 to 600, maybe even $700 every time you refill your tank. And a majority of the people that I live around, they use propane, which there's nothing wrong with it. But if you're trying to save money and trying to do the same thing, a wood stove or solar power would be right up there, you know. And I thought about solar power, but the downside to solar power is then you got to get even more stuff for solar powered stuff, not just the panels and stuff, but like you would have to change all the stuff with the stuff, with your heating, and I just don't feel like dealing with that. So I feel like a wood stove would be better. Um, and you get to split the wood yourself. You can. I mean, you could technically buy from a wood dealer, a person that does lumber, but I got tons around me. It's not to say that it would, you know, that I would um, that I would be good for the rest of my life living here, as far as wood goes. But it does grow back really quick. 10 inches a year. The average red pine grows. So that's about a foot a year. So everything that like I do is calculated. Everything I cut down, I make sure it's not just any tree to cut down because you got to think about the wildlife. You got to think about the environment. Like trees store carbon. They cut down on air pollution. They provide shade. They also lower your electric bill because they provide shade in the summer, and stuff like that. And I like arborism. I like arbory. It's basically the study of trees and cutting down trees. It's fun. It really is. It's fun. It's a hobby. But you can't just cut any tree down. And I try to, whenever I look at trees on my property and in my forest here behind my property, you have to make sure you want to get the bad ones out first. Other people say to get the healthier trees first, but I disagree. I'd rather get the dead ones that are dead or leaning real bad, get them first, use them for firewood, and then go from there. And then that way you're not using the good, the real good pines that are still big. Give them time to grow even more, and be smart about it. And so like if you ever have, in the Northeast here, it's typically colder than in the South. So you're gonna get storms. When there's hurricanes and stuff in the late summer. I'd say in August and in the fall. You know, September, October, November, December. You know, you're gonna get like storms and stuff. So a lot of times you're gonna have dead trees from a storm, and then that's also free firewood because it's already gonna die. You might as well just cut it up, split it, and have it for firewood the next year or the year and a half after that. So, um, so it's kind of cool because if you think about it, yeah, when you burn when you burn wood, it does you do have carbon emissions. There's no doubt about it. But it's technically a renewable resource. Wood is, and so it is cool, and I respect that. And there's a couple people that use wood stoves in my community. A little bit more of the old-fashioned people, but I feel like that's the way to go if you live in the woods here. And where I'm at, I'm in the woods. I could probably do it instead of relying solely on propane for all my needs. Um, but that's kind of neat, Like you could still use propane for heating, hot water, stuff like that. But like, or for stuff like that. But like, as far as heating the house, I'd rather have a wood stove, because then that would drastically cut down the heating bill, and that's where a lot of the propane goes, and that's why it goes down so much is the heating of your home itself, not the heating of water and stuff like that. Um, and that would save so much money. And just like my log splitter, like if you invest in a good wood stove, like that's EPA certified, that's certified basically by the government, by the Environmental Protection Agency, then it's going to burn even more efficient. So that means that there's going to be a lot less carbon in the air that goes in the air when you burn your stove or when you burn your firewood. There's going to be a lot less pollution. It's going to burn a lot hot. It's not hotter, but it's going to burn cleaner. It's going to Your firewood's going to last a lot longer because it's higher efficiency. And now I don't know how they do all that. That's egghead talk. I don't understand all that stuff. But it's higher efficiency. So like you won't need as much firewood. Um, and yeah, I just think that that's cool. But like when I cut down trees, I try to look at, is it dead or dying? If it's dead or dying, it's gonna get cut first. Is it leaning bad? Is it going to fall over? Is it uprooted? Does it have any damage? If it does, those get cut first. Um, and that's why I cut probably 5 to 6 trees down at least. One out of all those trees that I cut down, only one was super healthy. Um, where it probably could have still lived, but I use it just because I wanted to have it for barbecue wood, and if I want to have a campfire or even heat it with my home eventually. It's oak, so it's going to last a lot longer. It's a lot more high efficient. It's a dense hardwood, whereas pine is not a hardwood, it's a softwood. Um, but just because it's a softwood doesn't mean that it's not a good heat source. You can still use it as a heat source. It just takes a little bit longer to dry. But no, I mean, I think that that's how you gotta do it. I think I got tons of pines here. There's some of these ones are a little bit, you know, some of these small ones I could probably cut, and it's just because they're angled weird, So they'd be the first ones to go in a storm. They'd be the first ones that would land on your house or crash into something or fall on your head. These other ones behind me here that are thicker, they got bigger roots. They're more rooted. They're better rooted in the ground. They're more established. Like those ones would be the last to cut. Because I'm not a logger. If you're a logger, if you're typically cutting them just for lumber, then yeah, I mean you could go for them instead of the small ones. But I'm not doing that. I'm cutting them down because they're unhealthy or they're leaning or they're crooked, and those would be the first ones to go in a storm. So like if you're doing it for heating your home, then you should look at it the opposite of the logging industry. But still do selective harvest, but just go for the ones that are already dead or dying, that have been on the ground, but they're not fully rotted through. They're not like what do you call them, like termite infested. Now some of the wood that this last one did have ants in them, because they were starting to eat away at the tree, and eventually if I would have let that go for years, that would eventually crumble. One of the times the structure would crumble, and then it would fall on my car or somebody else's car or my house or whatever. And I stopped that from happening. I cut it down and it's good to go. But yeah, I mean, just and pine grows back very quickly, almost a foot a year. So you know on top of uh, cutting it down, the ones that are still around and growing, you're still getting a foot out. They're growing a foot a year. So it's not like they're not growing. When the other ones are cut. So it and they disperse so many seeds and stuff on my property where I'm not really worried about them, like not coming back. After I cut them, because their seeds and all that stuff, the pine cones and all that stuff, they disperse their seeds and stuff like it. They're they're a lot easier to grow back than other trees would. So my first ones are the pine, and then of course if there are other species of trees where they're dead or damaged, then I cut them. But typically I always look towards the pine first because there's plenty of pine. Pine's not going to go extinct. Um, pine's not pine's not going to become an endangered tree anytime soon. But no, I like doing that. It's fun. The tree felling's fun. It's a fun hobby, and also you get fuel out of it. So um, you just got to know what you can and can't cut. Like I wouldn't say like cut down all the trees on my property. No way. No way. I mean, you could. It would look like hell. It'd be bad for the environment. You could, but it'd drive down your home value, and it just wouldn't look good. It would not be good for the fall, and when it rains, nothing. The soil would not be kept together. It would erode the soil. Like you got to think about all that. And some of the pines too. If you think about this too, some of these pines are not native to my area. So, like a Scots pine, I have a Scots pine somewhere to the left of me here, across from me where I'm sitting. I have a Scots pine, and that's supposed to be from Scotland. And that's an invasive pine that is on my property. So technically I could cut it down. Um, I'm not worried about it right now, unless I needed firewood. But, yeah, there are invasive pines, too, that are not native to your ecosystem. And typically, those are also one of the first ones that I cut down, too. Same thing with, like, pest bushes. Like, if I have honeysuckle on my property, too, right? And the honeysuckle is not native honeysuckle to the area or even the continent or even the country that I'm in. So they're Asian honeysuckles that were brought in from China, and they harm the ecosystem because they disperse their seeds so quickly and they take over the native ecosystem and kill the native honeysuckle and other trees and saplings. So all that is taken into account when I cut down trees. Everything I do is calculated, and that's the very first things that I cut are pest trees, dead or dying trees, trees that are leaning, um, damaged trees, trees that are getting disease or anything. They're the first ones to go. It's almost like mowing your yard, but like it's hard to explain. You're just calling the weak trees first to help the healthy trees grow more and help the native ecosystem. And it's all about helping the native ecosystem. It's technically you're helping out the environment by cutting down those bad trees and getting rid of the disease and pests from those trees, to help the ecosystem and the wildlife. And I even have a rose bush here, which is really cool. I have a rose bush in front of my, actually just behind my, in front of whatever, behind whatever. That's just across from my fireplace, or from my fire uh, burn pit, whatever you want to call it. And those are roses, which is really cool. And yeah, so when they bloom, you get roses. So I had to trim a couple of them, a couple of the branches, because they expand out real quick, a lot, and they 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 scratch it because they got thorns on them. So technically, they're a thorn in your side, pun intended. So I have to cut some of them just so that they don't, go and poke me every time I mow my yard. But yeah, I mean everything I do has a purpose, and so I probably if I were to combine all my firewood right now, probably 2 cords of firewood, and that's just pine. Um, that could probably heat my whole house for a year. Whoop! There goes a stick down. See, dead branches and stuff, but off of that one tree. But yeah, I mean, there's some pines that I could cut down. Then there's other trees where I see if they're not pines, I value them more because they're diverse to the ecosystem, and you want them to grow. You want them to disperse their seeds and grow. I think I have an aspen. A beech tree. I have one American chestnut tree. Um, I have some oaks, and I got like 2 or 3 maples. And I got a couple of them, and you could technically burn down paper. Yeah, no, maple. You could do maple, but I don't have a lot of maple, so I don't want to burn them. So I value them highly too because they're hardwood. Most of them are hardwoods. Some of them are softwood maples, but I don't know. I don't know. I think this one's a hardwood maple, but I think I got a red maple. Um, but some of their branches need trim, and yeah, I got some here. I got oak. I got beech, American chestnut. I don't want to cut down the American chestnut because those are valuable, and they look nice for the ecosystem. They provide food to animals and deer and birds and stuff like that. And it's good for the environment. But yeah, the pines are the first ones to go because there are so many of them. And when you get rid of them, you create space for the other trees to kind of grow, expand, and disperse their seeds, and it makes it a more diverse ecosystem. Because pines are never going to go extinct, believe me. You know, you, you want more of the oaks and the maples, stuff like that. Cherries are good. The cherry wood is good. That would also go good for a wood stove. And yeah, I mean I got two pines right now that are small that I could technically cut down because the what is this? The oak or no? No, I think it's a maple. No, they look like it could be maple. Though the maple branches are overreaching on the pine, and it's just harming the pine to grow. And it's a thin pine, anyways. But I don't know. I'm contemplating if I should just let it grow and maybe just trim the maple branches. But um, I don't know. But some of these pines can go, and it won't harm me too much. They don't provide much shade. They're really just they're actually harming the other pines around them that are already established, and they're um, they're more of a pest than anything. But like, yeah, you want to do it selectively. Like, you don't want to cut down every single pine, because then you don't have any pine. But it's fun. It's definitely a hobby. It's and then like if you cut down branches and stuff, you want to put it back into the ecosystem. So that's what I do. If they're branches, I trim them. They call it delimbing in the forestry industry. You delimb the trees, you throw it back in the forest, you let it rot down, or you create an environment for the bugs and birds and stuff to sit on and feed from, or whatever, even wildlife to eat from. So everything gets repurposed back into the environment. So it's technically recycling. I did that with some of my honeysuckle bushes. I trimmed them up. I didn't cut them, although I could have cut every single honeysuckle down, but I didn't, even though they're invasive, just because it provides a nice little cover. I did one beside my mailbox here. Trimmed that up pretty good. Now, I trimmed that up because it's going to grow 8 feet. I think they grow several feet a year, anyways, and they're invasive as it is, but I try to cut down a lot of the invasive honeysuckle because it harms the trees, it harms the birds. It only provides, carbohydrates. It doesn't provide any fats for the birds, so it's not good for the environment, the native environment itself. And it takes away from the trees' nutrients, and so that's why I cut down a lot of the honeysuckle around me. On a lot of people's properties, they don't really pay attention to the honeysuckle because they think it's native, or they just don't pay attention to it. And whatever, it's fine. Do your own thing. But for me, it's taking away from the native honeysuckle. So like, you want to kind of trim that shit down, at the very least. Most people just cut it if they really want to get rid of it, but I try to trim it. I did cut down actual honeysuckle down by near my, well, it's not my tree, but it's down near my pond here. I trimmed down some. I cut all that honeysuckle down. It'll still grow back even after cutting it, but I'm not worried about it because I cut down a pretty good chunk of it, and it helps my aspen over here. I think it's a quaking aspen. I could be wrong, but I think it's a quaking aspen. Or no, it's a tooth aspen. A tooth aspen. ED. Um, and some people use that for lumber. You could cut it down, but that's just stupid. Because it's only like one or two on my property, and I'm not going to cut down an aspen. They're too valuable. And, you don't need to. I mean, I got plenty of pine. So I try to, if I'm gonna cut down stuff, I look at two things. Am I gonna use it for barbecue? And even then, I got tons of wood for barbecue now. Or am I gonna use it for firewood? Or is it already half dead? If it's already half dead, I'm gonna just cut that then, and that's what I did. So about 99% of the trees I cut down were dead, dying, leaning real bad, widowmakers, and just they were gonna fall down eventually or break or whatever. And so that's all the wood that I got stored up was wood that was gonna eventually die anyways, including my black cherry tree, which was eventually gonna fall down eventually, and it was starting to lean real bad, um, and that goes good with firewood too, and barbecue. And I made money off of it. I made $20 off of just one purchase. Off of one purchase, one of my customers wanted some cherry wood. I gave him 3 bundles. The third bundle was free, $10 bundles, and got $20 out of it. And it makes good barbecue. Like, If you burn with cherry, it's gonna make the meat like dark red. But don't let that deter you. It doesn't mean that your food's raw. It's the oils, it's the sap, it's the resin in the actual cherry. And believe me, it's well seasoned. Within 4 to 6 weeks, it's fully seasoned for cherry wood versus all the other woods. And cherry burns really good. It burns hot. It's very combustible. You can burn it in your wood stove, and it's a good wood. It has better BTUs than pine. Pine has the lowest BTU, but there's plenty of it, so you can still use it. Don't let people think that just because it's pine you shouldn't burn it, even if it's seasoned. You can, because there's plenty of it. But oak is the platinum, is the gold standard when it comes to burning firewood in cords of firewood. But it also costs more if you were to buy it. So yeah, I know all that stuff. Like I like all that stuff. And a lot of the people think that you can't burn with pine. You can burn with pine. You just gotta have it seasoned like any other wood. Like if you burn, I don't know, let's say oak, right? And it's not seasoned, it's gonna do the same thing that an unseasoned pine would do, or any other unseasoned wood. It's gonna boil the water out of the wood, and that's taking energy away from the actual fire, than to just burn the wood itself. Than to just burn dry wood. So it takes some of the heat away and some of the uses out of it. So I have oak over here. I have oak wood chunks on my porch here, and then I also have, or actually on my deck, excuse me. And then I got stored bigger chunks of oak that are sitting over near my other pines out here. Again, they're up off the ground, so they're not rotting. They're not going to get touched by the insects. And that's another thing too. Is if you're storing firewood, you want up off the ground. The previous owner, before my relative bought the property, is they had wood, but they had it on the forest floor. So when they stacked all that wood on the bottom is getting rotted, and then once that's rotted, then they go up. The insects will eat the other stuff, and it just rots. And they didn't take care of it. They just kind of stacked it, and they didn't really look into all that stuff. They just kind of stacked it and did it. Um, so there's tons of stuff to it, and it's fun. It really is. The tree felling, it's fun. Safety is the number one thing. When you cut down the trees, you got to know all that stuff, and um, you got to know where you're gonna step if it falls, or when it starts falling. You got to know where your escape route's gonna be. It's supposed to be a 45-degree angle. You don't want to be behind it, because if it barber chairs, it's gonna come back and hit you in the head. It could kill you. Could fall on you. You could break bones, whatever. So you want to have a 45-degree angle from the point of where you cut the tree. Um, and you want to cut about, on the back cut, you want to have probably about a good 2 to 3 inches above the actual notch, and behind the notch you want to have 2 to 3 inches above where the notch is, and then cut it. And then typically you don't want to just cut it right then and there, although I have. On a safe on In a safer note, you want to actually leave a little bit of a hinge, because that hinge it guides the tree where it's going to go. And It's safer that way. It drops slower, and you put in a couple plastic or metal wedges in there. Just get some cheap wedges, hammer it in there, and then you can keep cutting. What I like to do is I try to cut about 99% of the tree, throw in a couple wedges in there, clobber it, and then it comes down to where you want, and it won't fall back on you because you got wedges putting that force in that opening. And it's also good for your chainsaw, because your chainsaw won't get stuck. But if it's sharp enough, you might not have to worry about it getting your chainsaw. But that's another thing too, is the compression. So there's so much to it. But it's really not when you go to do it. It just makes sense, When you go to fell a tree, it's not really that bad. It's not as complex as people make it out to be. You just got to use common sense. And you just got to be smart on it. Like you can't be dumb. when you're tree felling. Like, you got to make sure if it falls, if it comes back, I got to go 45 degrees to where I'm at. And before you fall the tree, you got to make sure that you cut down the brush around you. So that's what I always try to do first. I cut down any of the honeysuckle that's around me. And again, it's invasive, so it's not a big deal. So you cut all that around you. You throw it where you're not gonna go, in your evacuation route when you go to fell the tree, and then you got wide open space. You know where to go. And for me, I use a helmet too. So if I have dead branches, if there's dead branches usually on a lot of trees. If one of those branches fall on your head without a hard hat, you're probably going to get a concussion, hurt, broken bones, dead, depending on how dense the branches are. So, I like to use an ANSI safety certified arborist helmet, just because it's safer. If stuff falls on you there, it's not as bad. You're not going to get hurt. It's safety inspected and stuff. It's a good helmet. It's a good helmet for tree felling. It's made for arborists, and anybody can do it. You just got to know what you're doing. And many people don't do it that way, and many people don't have the protective gear. And I don't agree with it, but you can do it that way. But if you ever have something that falls on your head, you could die. So I'd rather just have the protective gear in place, gloves, all that stuff in it. It's perfect. And to minimize as much safety risk as possible. And yeah, it's fun. It really is. And then you get all that stored up wood. You have a ton of wood. And then, when you get a wood stove, you got all that wood to burn. And you're not paying an energy company for propane. You're self-sufficient. I guess you could say you're off the grid as far as heating goes, for the most part. You're not beholden to an energy company that's price gouging their resources. If you think about it, like the energy industry in the United States, it's not subsidized by the government, so they're private companies driving up the prices. Even during pandemics, they increase their prices without really any government oversight, and sometimes that can make or break people's wallet. For me, I'd rather, as much as I can, I'd rather be financially independent from the energy companies as much as I can within my own power, and that's by getting a wood stove, and you're not relying on their energy for most of the things. You're still going to need it for some things like boiling water and stuff like that. But for heating, that's where a lot of the propane and natural gas goes, is the heating. And I want to make the switch to wood when I get some more money eventually with these talks. So yeah, that's my plan. I like doing it. It's fun. It's fun. And I think every guy that lives in the woods should do that. Um, if you live in the city, you probably can't. You probably can't get firewood. Not as easily as accessible as where I live right now in the Jingweeds. And I think every guy that lives in the woods, whether they're married or they got kids or whatever, should rely on a wood stove, because it's so much more money efficient. You're saving so much more money, and it's even more cost effective than even a wood pellet stove. Yeah. Because you're not having to buy wood pellets. You have the wood right on your property. It's a free fuel source. Cut them down. Cut down the shitty trees first that are dead or dying. Use that first, and then go from there. And that's what I do. So I always look for the dead trees first, or if a neighbor needs their trees cut down and they're garbage trees, they're dead or dying, you can use that wood. And even if that doesn't work, there's a lot of free wood that's on Facebook Marketplace that you can just cut it, or it's already cut, and you just cut it down to the size that you want, and you take it for free, So that's what's even nicer about that, is free fuel source. The only thing, though, is you have to let it age. You have to let the firewood age. And I can't stress that enough. But I did burn pine. I did burn some I like to burn, when I get a real hot fire, I like to burn the crappy pieces of wood, the bad chunks that didn't cut right, or junk pieces. I throw them in the fire first, um, just because those wouldn't burn anyways, um, if they were, on their own. So if you have a hot fire, I just throw in the junk pieces of wood that aren't cut right and would otherwise get wasted or tossed into the jingweeds. I like to, and there was a couple pieces of wood that I had to throw out because it was infested with ants yesterday when I was log splitting. But again, though, I have a huge pile right in front of me that I'm looking at, and that's all from a dead tree that otherwise would have been wasted. That would have been sitting on the forest floor, gaining tons of pests and termites and ants, and it would have been wasted. And potentially could have fell on somebody's car or on somebody, a neighbor, whoever. And now I made the forest safer, for everyone around me. So that not just that, you make it better for the environment, you make it better from trees falling on people or yourself or your property. So it benefits so many things that it outweighs the risks by far. So yeah, I mean I'm blessed with it. I'm blessed, So um and yeah, it is a fun thing. It's actually kind of addictive because it's you don't want to cut down every tree, but you look for every tree that's bad or thin or that's not going to grow right, and you cut them down. But if it's like a small tree like this, like an inch wide, then of course you're not going to cut it down. But if it's like a pine that's over here that's kind of half dead or real weird lean, then yeah, cut it down. A lot of people don't do that. But if you know it's not gonna grow very good compared to these other big pines, cut it down. Use it for firewood. But you can't use it immediately. You have to wait a year, 6 months, a year to a year and a half. But yeah, it's fun. Like it's cool. And like I said, it's a renewable source of energy because trees are always growing. Unless you clear cut the forest, you're gonna always have trees growing, especially pines, 10 inches a year, almost a foot a year. So these pines ain't going anywhere. Um, but yeah, that's just so fun about it. So yeah, there's just so many benefits to using wood. Where other energy forms of energy they just aren't feasible in the long term. But I mean, if I went fully wood stove, I probably would have to buy firewood, from other people. But even then, it's still cheaper than propane, which is crazy. But yeah, yeah. If you live in the forest here like I do, just switch to a wood stove, and that's what I plan on doing. Just switch to a wood stove, for a lot of the stuff because a lot of it you can get away with heating. You can heat your entire home with wood, and that's what I plan on doing in the foreseeable future. And yeah, so that's about it. Peace.